Okay.
Yay.
We have two main questions this week. So discussing multiple or dual relationships in clinical practice and when would they be acceptable and or recommended and
Hmm.
when to be avoided.
Yeah.
Um,
And then the question about touch, therapeutic touch. Shall we start with the multiple relationships question?
Yeah. Um, that one I found really interesting and it's actually funny. I've been rewatching The Sopranos and I thought about the therapist relationship with Tony Soprano, and how there's like so much boundary crossing in a weird way. Uh,
Hmm.
and I've even had like friends who are therapists say they've had like they're just like out at like the some of them are DJs and they'll be DJing and they'll have clients come up to them and try to talk to them. They're just like, I don't know how to have this like interaction. Because I'm supposed to come up to you and like all that type of stuff. So it's like,
So
yeah.
your
Mhm.
friends will be DJing and their therapist comes up to them?
Oh no, they are the therapist and then the
Therapist.
clients come up to them. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Mhm.
That's interesting. I hope I'm
Mhm.
not interrupting your flow.
Oh no, no, definitely not.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because the therapists I've had have usually told me, like when we have a conversation about the
Mhm.
potentiality for us to meet out in public, they always say to me, I will never acknowledge you. You would, unless you acknowledge me first. And
Mhm.
I would never disclose the nature of our relationship. That would be up to you whether you want to do that or not, to whoever like we might be with in a public
Mhm.
situation. So so it's always been my understanding that it's up to the client to decide whether or not to acknowledge the therapist.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's what I meant. I think I got like I switched around
Oh,
the roles. But
oh, oh,
yeah, I
okay.
think it was
Sorry.
more just like my friends showing like kind of discomfort because it's like we're in like a really social setting and like
Oh, yeah.
you're in a different role than being a therapist and then the person comes up and I know one particular friend said that the client tried to talk to them about something in therapy and they're just like, I mean, I
Oh,
don't know if this is the setting for that to happen in. Maybe we could keep it for another, like, for when we have our sessions. But yeah, very like,
did the did your friend who was a DJ slash therapist know that this client could potentially run into them in a situation like that? Like, was the client, had they ever had a conversation with the client saying, "Oh, I hear that you like go to clubs or whatever, or raves or whatever. Um, by the way, I'm also a DJ, so there is potential for us to run into each other." Do you know if they
actually, no. Yeah, I actually did not ask that question. That's a
Mhm.
good point. Yeah, because I wonder that too, like when I go into practice, because I go to clubs and I go to shows and I see music and stuff, and I'm sure I'll have clients who like have similar interests to me at some point. So I do wonder how I would respond to that type of scenario.
Yeah. I had a myself a situation kind of, I don't know if it's similar to that, but this was many, many years ago. I was in graduate school at the time for fine art, which was my prior career.
Mm-hmm.
And my therapist, who was through the university that I went to, UCLA, um, had mentioned to me that she had some artist friends and that like kind of hinted that she might be somewhat familiar with like the prof- professional and cultural milieu that I was getting into. But I did not expect to see her. Like I went to all these gallery openings one night, and at one of the inside one of the galleries there was like a dance party going on, and my friends and I kind of like hovered at the door. We're like, oh, this is interesting. And someone said, yeah, everyone here is on ecstasy. And we didn't end up going in because I saw my therapist in there dancing, And I was like, okay, great. Now I know that my therapist does, I mean, I made the assumption,
Yeah.
I made the assumption that like, okay, so my therapist takes drugs, which
Mhm.
I don't judge that, but like that was not who I thought she was.
Yeah, right.
Fucked up. It really messed up my it confused my understanding of who she was and who she was in relation to me, because also she was like dancing with a guy, not that I knew him or anything, but I suddenly realized like, oh, like we could literally be like dating the same people and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that before. I just so that so it
Yeah.
really it actually ruined the relationship.
Did you end
And
up cutting it off too?
putting off,
Did you end up like ending your therapeutic relationship?
I think it took me a little while, but I did, and I never really talked to her about what was really happening for me, which was that I suddenly went from, so she'd been that kind of classic cool therapist,
Hmm.
like kind of maybe a psychoanalytic kind of way of holding space. So
Hmm.
she she never felt like loving. I could never tell if she was actually just she was really doing that blank screen thing with me.
Oh, yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
so I had kind of put her on a pedestal,
Hmm.
thinking that she was just this sort of like omniscient sort of person who was beyond um sort of like beyond my kind of framework of sorry, I'm just kind of going down this
It's
rabbit hole right now. I wasn't expecting to go here.
okay.
All of a sudden, when I realized she was actually really close to me culturally,
Hmm.
or like socially culturally, I suddenly had this inversion of like suddenly, instead of thinking that she was this impartial human being, I suddenly was like, wait, is that kind of coolness that I experienced from her actually disdain? Like, is she actually sort of competitive with me? Are we occupying
Huh.
like similar space
Mhm.
as like, women who were at that time, like, I don't know how old she was. I was like 30,
Mhm.
and she was pretty close in age to me. And I just felt like, are we occupying really similar space? And is this actually a weird competitive thing that I'm getting from her? So it completely changed how I perceived just the way she held space within our therapeutic container
Oh, yeah.
in a really not good way.
Yeah. See, that's like something I would just worry about. And I think that's why with this question, I was like, for me, I would have like such strong boundaries where I mean, I don't have like a desire to have like a dual relationship with someone. And I feel like if I were to have like some sort of desire with the client where if it went, I mean, the extreme would be like I'm like sexually attracted to them or something, but that would be something to talk to my own therapist about. But I think it's also like if I were, I would probably be like, well, that broke like a barrier, like a fourth wall, and I feel like this is interfering with our relationship and I can't go on or whatever. But yeah, I
Yeah.
would worry about even in like your scenario, yeah, having like my image kind of be like tarnished. No, like the authority figure image is kind of gone. Um, yeah, that's so wild. Like I now I'm like, oh, what if someone sees me out in the world and they're like, oh, that's my therapist.
Yeah. I mean, especially depends like how, I mean,
Mhm.
we all have judgments, and
Yeah.
I've actually had a number of like situations where just seeing a therapist outside, I had a therapist who, when I was a professional artist, I invited her to, like, I sort of sheepishly invited her to come to an opening of a show that I was having in New York. I was living in New York at the time. And I shouldn't have invited her because I actually didn't really enjoy her presence. She came
Oh,
and
wow.
she said to me, she said, I think I probably will come to your opening. I'm not going to say hello to you though, unless you like come
Yeah.
up to me. She said, so I'll just stand in the background. But like I kind of saw her across the room and she like smiled at me in this really sweet way, like, like supportive, like, yeah, or something like that. And I was kind of like, wow, that's really distracting. I feel really awkward. And then later I felt like she shouldn't have come, even though I had invited her. So
Yeah, totally.
similarly, I feel it would be really, I will be very, very reluctant to engage
Mhm.
in any kind of dual relationship. And when they ask, when they say there might be times when it could actually even be helpful to the beneficial to the client, like they said, for instance, a graduation, this was in the reading. I thought, if this was someone who was, let's say, a first generation American who had just like worked so hard to get to this point of like graduating from college or something. They were the first person in their family. And like it was such a huge accomplishment for them. And we'd really worked so closely together and like I just really been with them as they like, overcame a lot of difficulties and obstacles. Yes, I feel like if they wanted me there, I would want to be there because that feels like that would somehow be like a beautiful way to sort of bring closure to a big a big, accomplishment in their life. A big,
Yeah,
yeah, but
yeah. I could see that for sure because you're a big part of their support system. Yeah, I actually thought about, I have a friend who has had her therapist for 10 years. So she had this therapist since that person was a graduate student, like being supervised. And she was saying like, oh, for our 10 year, I really want to give my therapist like a gift, but I don't know if that's like against boundaries. And I was like, that's a good question. Because for me, I was like, well, that's something you should ask your therapist. Be like, is it okay if I give you a gift or flowers or something? Because and then I was like, if she says no, you have to kind of be okay with that too, because that's also her boundary. But then it's like there's the risk of my friend being like hurt by that. So it's kind of like weighing like the pros and cons, like if you want to go a little past what your view of this person is. But yeah. Um, she ended up not doing it because she was like, I don't know, I feel weird. I don't want it to ruin like our 10-year relationship or whatever. But yeah,
it seems like flowers would be something
right?
pretty
Like neutral.
yeah, and also because what my takeaway was that it was not unethical to accept small gifts in general.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, yeah, I was thinking like you don't want to accept like someone doing something that, you know, was out like, sorry,
Hmm.
excessive, but
Yeah. And
flowers seem so innocent.
right? Yeah, exactly. That's how I felt. But I mean, yeah, hopefully one day she'll be like, I'm just gonna give her flowers. But
Yeah,
um
that's really sweet.
okay. It said if there's like acceptable dual relationships you could think of, but for me, I like, yeah, I guess I'm so set in the like no category that I can't see it personally.
Same. I've just had as a client on the client's end, I've had too many moments where I just felt like I don't want to know you outside of here. Even
Yeah.
if I like the person, like my current therapist actually suggested us going together to this protest
Oh,
because we were sharing information about our
yeah.
feelings about a certain situation.
Mhm.
And she told me about this protest. And I was like, oh, yeah, I think I might go to that. Thanks for the info. And she was like, oh, do you want to meet up? And I was kind of like, and I said, no,
Yeah.
because not that it would be inherently problematic to do that with her,
Mhm.
but if she, let's say I didn't like something about how she behaved on a protest,
Totally.
it would really be something, yeah. I'm really trying to hold a certain kind of transference relationship with her, and it could undermine that.
Yeah, definitely. Huh. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I've thought about a lot of like political parts to therapy too. Like if I were to kind of agree with someone politically, if I would disclose that or not. So that's interesting to hear it from you with your therapist.
Yeah. 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 I mean, we were on the same page there. We
Mm.
are on the same page there. It's just, I was like, who knows? She might just, there might be something weird that happens on this march.
Yeah.
And
Especially
then
'cause people act differently when they're in a, that kind of environment too. It's going to
Mhm.
be a lot different than like what you would think a therapist would be doing,
Yeah,
like a textbook therapist. But
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, I guess we could go to the second question about therapeutic touch.
Mhm.
That's something I've actually also been thinking a lot about because last semester for my family dynamics course, we had like a bunch of readings and videos we watched about certain practices that the therapist is doing touch, like very intentional, like touching their knee or touching their hand or even giving them a hug. And that being part of it, like a part of like kind of um like an intimacy building practice. But I'm still unsure of how I feel about doing it myself because that again, it's like a boundary thing, I think.
Totally.
Mhm.
And I feel like so long as you feel kind of unsure,
Mhm.
um, the touch could end up being potentially awkward,
Mhm.
like you may have an idea of what the meaning of the touch is, but if anything in you doesn't feel completely comfortable with that movement in that moment, that energetically it could just bring in something weird, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I too. So I think there's a somatics. Well, we're in different programs, but I'm trying to think. I think there's a somatics somatic uh, requirement in the ICP program. I'm not even sure. Um, do you have like somatics classes in your
No,
program?
actually, I'm curious about them. It's something that I thought about going into, but yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, nothing official yet.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I also I recently did something called water therapy. Like I
Mm.
got a treatment. It's like something where it's like a water massage. They call it water massage, but it's really more like it's quite beautiful. You feel like you're being rebirthed, and it's sort of like the practitioner is holding you in the water, and as you become comfortable, they start actually like they kind of move your body around. They actually start pulling you down so that it's completely your head submerged underwater
Oh,
as
yeah.
you become relaxed, and then you become able to hold your breath for a long time.
Whoa.
And there's something very maternal. It feels very much like this kind of gestational
Mhm.
period. And I felt like, wow, this could be really effective
Mhm.
for folks who have which we all have, like we all have birth related trauma.
Yeah. Mhm.
We don't necessarily remember it, but and also just mothering stuff. And so I thought, God, I really feel called to do this. This would be a great addition to like the work that I'm going to do as a therapist.
Mhm.
And then I thought, I don't know, again, like here you go, like how do I offer to my clients that, oh, normally in this room we sit across from each other, but get into a swimming pool with me and I'm going to hold your head underwater.
That's a
Uh,
lot of trust, I feel like, to be like
yeah.
established before that.
Yeah. So, I don't know if those things they might have to be separated if I ever wanted to do that, but it does make me think about, I do agree that, touch can be very therapeutic and healing, um, for so many reasons, about parenting and intimacy and all that stuff, and just having, for people who've experienced physical violence to get to have like a very safe experience with touch with someone that they know is holding them um, in the best intentions, but how to do it is, I feel like definitely
Yeah.
I need training if I'm gonna experiment with that.
I think that's how I feel too. I think training, I mean, I do plan on working in like grief and bereavement at some point and like with hospice. So I
Mhm.
feel like touch would be inevitable to like touch someone's hand, especially if they're passing and like, it is like you do want to be there for someone physically in that capacity as well. So yeah, I do think it would be, it's also my own thing. I'm also like not the most like affectionate with people I don't know very well. And like maybe a therapeutic setting, I'll know them really well, psychologically or cognitively, but physically, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, I'd be interested in trying a training though to see what like someone who has done this could say.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that about hospice and
Mhm.
grievance counseling, because that actually makes me think of a couple of instances I've had where, one as a volunteer, do spiritual support for people who are dying. I've only had one client so far,
Mhm.
and he passed away a few months ago. But
Mhm.
like, and he was quite a reserved man. Like it was hard for him to talk about feelings and everything. But at the last visit that I was with him,
Mhm.
like basically we eye gazed and I held his hands. And he was
Yeah.
kind of an old man, and it felt like I felt like I was able to nurture him and help him feel seen, and like
Yeah.
a really, I could just tell just by the way he received it, and the way he seemed to like just really stay present with it, that it was really good for him, and it felt really good to me.
That's
Yeah.
really beautiful. Yeah, that's like a great example of it where, like you're saying, with people who've also experienced like physical violence, something it's like so intimate, and especially if you have like the right energy where you're like trying to be healing. I
Hmm.
feel like it would make a huge difference. And for people who are like reserved and maybe didn't experience a lot of affection in their life,
Yeah.
and men, yeah,
Mhm.
the big group of people who aren't as comfortable with like physical touch in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, it's been a really nice conversation.
Yeah, definitely. All right.
Anything